Aubrey, this is an amazing piece of work that you've done, this report. 94% give a passing grade to their current company, but then we saw those stats. I mean, what is going on here?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is that there's enormous perception versus reality gap. And part of that is because we haven't actually articulated the goals of the diversity in tech movement. We talk about diversity and people look around and they do see people who are different from them. So the tech industry has a lot of international workers. But the fact is our actual goal is to stop the systematic exclusion of women, of Black and Latinos, of other people with marginalized identities. And we need to move into talking about that direction.
It's a fascinating topic that was on the front cover of the Atlantic magazine. Ellen, you've been pushing it out into this great report, Fully Charged news briefing that you put out today. Interesting, there have been many an advocate. We've heard many a woman get up there and put their thoughts through. Tracy Chu is one of them. What is she advocating? What are people starting to say is the recipe to fix this?
I think it's really emerging that people are understanding there's not a single silver bullet, there's not a single way that this is going to be fixed. I think people understand that the more that you talk about something, the more information you have out there publicly about it, the closer we can get to figuring out what works and what doesn't. And so what Tracy is well known for is she was originally, one of the few people to kind of push for companies to even put out their demographic stats to begin with. And that was something we saw happening a lot in 2014. And now I think people, everyone's kind of looking for that perfect way to fix it, but I think we're slowly coming to realize it involves a lot of small steps. It's very hard work. You hear people say this over and over again, but sometimes people forget, there's not going to be one way to fix it, even though it's tempting to think that there might be.
Over at Atlassian, Aubrey, what you're doing, you're looking at the psychological barriers potentially, some of the structural barriers, why we don't get inclusion, why we don't get full representation, and also how are you intervening? What are your programs doing to overcome these?
Yeah, so part of it is breaking down the lack of knowledge. So a good example from the survey is that 20% of respondents said that they believe that their company's a meritocracy, which research actually shows us that when you believe that, you're more likely to be biased. And that's something it's an industry-wide myth that we've told ourselves, that the tech industry is a meritocracy. And so a lot of what we do is educate our employees, not on that we are one, but how to build one in the first place. Okay. And that's things like auditing your promotion rates, ensuring that you're paying people fairly, looking at the rates that candidates are passing through your hiring to make sure that it's the same between men and women or between white people and people of color. So these are things that are grounded in empirical social science, and that's where we always start.
Ellen, are there any companies that are sort of held up as doing pretty well against the rest? Any that are particularly failing?
It's hard. I think if you talk to every company, they'll say, here's where we're trying to work, and here we have a lot more work to do. And here, people do hold up companies, I think, that have taken more bold stances on it. So Pinterest, Slack, these are examples of companies that have really come out and said, here's our goal, we're definitely prioritizing it. And that's complicated because I think every company is different, every company has different priorities that they're able to put at the top or different resources, depending on the size of the company. But it's definitely something that I think people continue to want to have more specifics about. And so, the more that we see people talking about it, the better.
I was at the Makers Conference and Tim Armstrong of AOL announced that day that there would be 50% of executives would be female and there would be 50-50 in terms of pay, ensuring that there was a balanced pay. But give us, Aubrey, your view also geographically, because your company, you're based here, but your company is Australian. Are there geographical differences? Is it a Silicon Valley problem? I see just as much of a problem in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, so the answer to that in terms of if you're even just looking at women in technology is that the rates of women getting technical degrees is different across a bunch of companies. So you see a lot of geographic variation, which again can be an aspect of diversity that we're trying to go for. But to get back to your earlier point, and one of the reasons we actually commissioned the study was because benchmarking and proper measurement is actually really important in trying to figure out how to make progress, because you can't make progress if you don't know where you are. And the other thing is we've heard from CEOs, we've heard from heads of diversity like myself, but we haven't heard a lot from what the frontline and the average tech worker is doing, and none of this is going to matter if we don't start changing the culture of the industry, and it's the real people every day that are going to do that. So we need a better understanding of where they are so that we can understand what the next step forward for them is.